Hello and welcome to the second edition of the RotHub International podcast. It's hosted by me, 𝗂𝗍𝗄𝗯, editor of RotHub International. Joining me this week, he is the helicopter finance guru, Clark McGinn, who's with us this morning. Clark has a long history in asset management, especially helicopter asset management. He was the lead at the Royal Bank of Scotland's Helicopter Asset Finance Group. He was MD of CHC Leasing, Senior Vice President at Waypoint Leasing, and now has his consulting Uplifting Advice. He's also a board member of the Caledonian Club, an enclave of all things Scots in London, where whiskey, haggis, neeps are consumed and claymores are swung at unsuspecting passers-by in Belgravia. Clark, welcome, and thanks for spending the time with us this morning.
Good morning, Gideon, and thank you. Come and have some neats and tatties with me.
I will do. I look forward to it. I was taught to drink whiskey by a former Sergeant Major of the Scots Guards, so I have some pedigree there. Anyway, I digress. Let's look at the industry at the moment. It's very interesting times, really, aren't they? I mean, we see growth in practically every element of the industry.
It is crazy, particularly after what's been effectively a decade of depression in the oil and gas markets, with bankruptcies, supply chain failures, crashes. It's just been miserable. But oil and gas is coming back post-COVID, which I think is a big issue. 𝗬𝗄𝗃 and 𝗂𝗄𝗃. Look at the fires in California. That's a sad thing. We've been seeing fire as an important investment for the last couple of years, and it's only coming further up if you excuse the pun, coming further up the tree. So we're at a point where everybody's interested in replenishing, rebuilding, and renewing their fleet.
And I think that's the other aspect as well, because I mean, besides the civil, parapublic, and public service sectors, you also have a situation where, perhaps driven by the global geopolitical situation or just fleet renewal, you have the military actors all looking at fleet renewals or upgrades as well, and that's a great pull on the supply chain of new aircraft parts, everything, engines, the lot.
No, absolutely. And you know as well as I do that the money in our industry is in the military production line. So the good thing is, if the military are really important, that pushes their production line through. And the civil side is a much smaller investment. That gives an umbrella for the civil side to keep it going. So it's the growth on both sides is a positive for civil.
I mean, it is interesting. I mean, you're looking at it. We had the briefing from Airbus just the other day about orders and deliveries, and I think overall their net order book increased by something 90 aircraft, and a lot of that was driven by the military aspect. I mean, there was the order last year, wasn't there, for sort of orders and options for something like 82 145s. And that's taken that backlog to something like 300 aircraft. 300. And the knock-on of that is, I suppose, when you think about for the offshore support sector, wind support, the 145 seems to be the wagon of choice for offshore wind, as much as AW189s, S92s, H175s have been for offshore oil and gas.
I think the development of the 145, just as a classic tale of the OEM listening to what the requirements are. We've seen the development, you through from the EC145 to the H145 to the 5 blades. Really clever work over a long time, and it's come to fruition. It's a good machine.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's that incremental improvement of a product. We aren't done yet, and certainly, not wishing to sound like a cheerleader for Airbus particularly, but again, that was something that Bruno said the other night, which was, we're not stopping here either. It's a constant product improvement of all the existing products. I guess it's always more exciting to talk about new things, new products. I mean, I get personally very excited about Racer, but it is about bringing on these established products and keeping them at the cutting edge.
And I think another example of that's the AW139. Yeah, we've seen Leonardo steal the lunch of Sikorsky's S-76. Yeah, when you and I were kids,
Yeah.
76 𝗂𝗃+ was everywhere. It was the
Yeah.
biggest workhorse in oil and gas. And now you could buy one for $200,000. And again, that's that continuous development. From the short nose to the long nose, all the way up now to 7 tons MTOW. That's a big, it's a much smoother process. And it allows an operator and an investor to incrementally invest. You're not having to ditch all of your 139s to go for a 140, excuse the parallel. What you're doing is you bring each new one you bring in is improving your fleet. Then, of course, you retire the back ones. We saw that with the short noses. The early number, particularly Philadelphia 139s next. And it allows a much smoother process with less new product risk than investing in, and we'll come on to probably talk about later, something like the 525 when it comes on board, which is a lot of new stuff and will take some bedding in. And
I guess that's something that people don't really think about so much. Once you get a new aircraft into operation, I was down with PHI last summer actually, and obviously one of the big things we were talking about, they had their first 160 there, and it was all about getting that ready for actual service, and it was going to be quite a long lead-in to actually test it out. And they said, look, we're building this on our experience when we were the launch customer with the S92, and we're taking those experiences and the things we learned during that and applying it here. I think one of the phrase, they told me never to use it, but I will anyway. The first step is to 𝗶𝗃 it. And actually see how it's going to work in the 𝗿𝗿𝗃𝗀𝗃 of going out to rig after rig 3 times a day, every week in, week out. It's kind of interesting, and that whole incremental thing. Again, when you're talking about the 139, I guess you can apply it with the operating of the engines with a 189 as well.
And I remember at RBS, our first 139s were still AB 139s that we financed. It's interesting. The PHI 160 is a very interesting risk-sharing development because, of course, you have PHI, you have Milestone, who are the lessor, you have Airbus, and you have Shell. Everybody in there is trying to make that process much easier than it was 20 years ago when we were bringing in the 92, where the onus was very much on the operator to iterate with the OEM at the operator's risk. We've grown as an industry into a much wiser industry in terms of risk sharing, and that's only appropriate given the long life nature of the asset. We're all in this for a long time. So let's make sure that aircraft introduction is much, much smoother than it was last generation.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's one of those sort of interesting things with rotary aviation compared with fixed wing airline type operations is exactly that. The life of the airframe, non-pressurized, all that sort of thing. The life of the airframe is significantly longer, and you talk in terms of first life, second life, and even third or fourth life for an asset. And I think that's one of the separators. Think back and compare it with the fixed wing world. But it is interesting, that whole mindset, because there's also a bit of a shift, because even though there's been this resurgence in offshore energy, and that may, especially I'm going to call it the Gulf of Mexico, with the new administration, there's a great uptick in expro and all those things. But we haven't seen the kind of order frenzy that we saw maybe at the turn of the last century, in the early 2010s and all that era. What do you think about that?
I think that's a good thing. I hope we've learned our lesson. I think one of the problems in the upturn last time, Gideon, was 2 elements. Business is booming, expro development as well as production. And so the big operators, rather than taking their old equipment off onto second life, used them for exploration. So all of a sudden, expro came from 5 to 8% of the fleet to 25% of the fleet. The second thing was the big operators had their order books, and the big lessors, had their order books. And guess what? They were duplication. So when when the oil price totally collapsed, the first thing was the Seven Sisters, the oil majors, said, no more exploration. 25% of your fleet is on the ground today. Yeah? Then comes the attrition of cost pricing. Give us 10%, guys. Give us 20%, guys. Give us 50%, guys. Or guess what? Yeah? Then comes the slowdown, and even your core fleet's on the ground. So that was really where the bankruptcies came from, Gideon. Here, yeah, we seem to be taking it a bit slower. Yeah, there've been a couple of orders. We saw the Equinor order, which we've talked about later if you want. Yeah, we've seen the lessors put in a couple of small orders. We've seen a couple of operators, rounding out their fleet. But there's no, the big days of a 50-unit spec order outside Saudi Arabia it isn't there. And I pray every night that it will come back.
Yeah, because I think that's the thing. It is perhaps for want of a better phrase, a more mature approach to market growth than perhaps it was in the past. The good times are rolling, and reacting to, and I guess a little bit comes in now with the oil companies, especially approaching operators and saying, well, we'd like this capacity and that capacity, and the operators being able to drive a much harder bargain.
Yeah, absolutely right. Because that change, you see the LCI analytics numbers that show utilization were effectively fully used. With the problems around the supply chain. That's meant that after 10 years of taking reductions in pricing and reductions in terms and conditions, the operators now have a more balanced view. And I've been talking to a lot of the oil companies. My investors in particular worry about the termination for convenience clause, which allows the oil major to walk away for no reason whatsoever at 30, 60 or 90 days, depending on how it's done. I really hope that part of that maturity, and there are a couple of very, very intelligent people in the procurement side of the oil majors that are looking at that. If we got rid of that, that would be a much more stable base to allow more investment to come in so that we can take the next step of fleet growth.
It's got to be the key, hasn't it? Because without the investment, as the old saying goes, no bucks, no Buck Rogers. It's that fundamental thing of saying, yes, there is demand and everything like that, and that's great. But the oil industry, since the strike at Spindletop, had been cyclic. It was ever that.
And that's the interesting thing. We're in a great place in terms of manufactured pipeline. We're in a great place on the oil price. We're in a great place in the growth of HEMS and EMS, Parapublic. We've had new search and rescue contracts awarded. Yet investors that I talk to are still pretty cautious. And if you look at, just mention our friends at PHI, they've been talking about going public for 18 months now. Can't get the traction on it. There are 4 other divestment mandates out there that have been talked about over the last year. Not happening yet. So we've got a little bit of a wait. We've got to prove that we've learned our lessons from 10 years ago. And we've got to tweak our business just a bit more to make it investable the way that fixed wing investing is, the fixed wing aircraft are. Because we need that money, because the growth is there, and we need to capture that in a sensible way, and that will come from outside money.
Let's talk. I mean, you've touched on it a little bit. Let's talk. We've talked about how existing airframes have been progressed along the upgraded, constant assessment. How do we continuous improvement? The old saying used to be, and that's really happened with all the OEMs. They're progressively improving the existing products. But then we have, and we've touched on it briefly, something really new, the Bell 525, which we wait for certification with bated breath. Do you think is that more of a game changer in just reintroducing another OEM as a competitor in that market, which is, to all intents and purposes, the Leonardo Bell show these days? Leonardo Airbus show.
Because Bell, of course, we're beloved. The 412, like the 76, the workhorse of a generation ago, but it hasn't gone up. It's interesting that Bell has sort of double risked in the 525. I've got a horrible feeling that the word processing unit in their comms department has an F1 button. You can just push it and say certification in the next quarter.
Yeah.
It comes up automatically. Joking apart, I really respect the 𝗿𝗃 people. I think two things I'd say, Gideon. One is that they are manfully working with the FAA to get this new fly-by-wire through. They put their shoulder to the wheel, and I take my hat off to them for doing that. The second thing is, I think it will be a very interesting machine, but a lot's going to depend on how it comes out for pricing and the direct operating costs. And of course, that's pretty shadowy at the minute. So I hope, for 𝗿𝗃's sake, they get the pricing right. Otherwise, they'll have wasted an awful lot of time.
I mean, that's the old thing, isn't it? I mean, if you distill the business of aviation down to its essence, simply about shifting people or things from here to there by air at a price that is sustainable for the operator and so on. And it all comes down to that seat mile cost or kilogram mile cost or whatever may apply.
Please don't tell everybody that's so simple, or I'll be out of job, Gideon.
That's simple.
Okay, it's much more complicated than that.
Much more complicated. Loads of elements. What am I talking about? But yeah, I mean, that whole idea, and that's, as you say, and that's what it's going to come down to as operators start looking at their choices. And then there's, I suppose, there's always the ace in the hole, perhaps. I mean, 𝗂𝗏𝘁𝗆 keeps intimating that they may restart production. They may see a market for 15 to 20 airframes for the S92.
Now, I'm a big fan of the S92. You're one of the first aircraft I financed at RBS. Was the interim SAR contract for the UK, which was S92s. And remember being at HAI, the 92s there, not its livery, and they fired the indoor fireworks, and the cap hit CHC's chairman right in the head. I thought that was an omen. But the 92 is great. It's hard. Again, I think there could be a production need for it, but that's going to be a very conservative, from my side, price. And I don't think the sort of capital costs that Leon and the guys are talking about is sustainable in a market. The second thing you've got is that, of course, Milestone, our friends in the leasing company, they've got 100 and a couple S92s in there. They're very motivated to make them work at a price. So it comes down again. What's the depreciated cost per mile, cost per cycle, however you want to work it out, and will that work?
And then I guess there's the other ace in the hole, and will cause palpitations among many, especially in the North Sea. But I can't help noticing that Airbus delivered 58 H225s last year, and have taken orders for another 12 this year so far. For 3 weeks of the year. So what about that as a wild card? Because for certain missions, I mean, super mediums are fantastic, undoubtedly. Already H175s, 189s are all delivering on their promises. Some missions where you need a 92 or a 225, and that's
no, I could agree. But I love the 225. Obviously, tragic circumstances brought it into view, and perhaps our friends at Airbus could have handled that more efficiently or better, but that's hindsight for you. Certainly, it's flown in oil and gas missions in Asia and in Latin America, and of course, China. A lot of them were reconfigured by people at Peter Zhang, back into China for utility work. I think the issue for the North Sea is the unions. They have set their heart against it. They've marched up the top of the hill, and you know what it's like. Once you've got to the top of the hill, you've got to either stand there or you've got to climb down. And I don't see that happening. It's a shame, but I think we are where we are.
And I guess as well, there's another element for that platform. We talked a little bit at the top of the program about fires and what's been going on in California over the last couple of weeks. And there again, there is driving need for large, heavy. And there are a couple of retrofits around, with the Firecat and others, repurposing the 215, 225 for firefighting.
Yep.
There aren't enough CH-47s. If you go down to see Leon and ask for an S70i or to convert to Firehawk, he'll say, "Yeah, that's fine. Can I have your deposit, and I'll see you in 2 years or 3 years."
Yeah, the Firehawk, when I first heard it, when I was at Waypoint, I thought, yeah, that's a great concept, but who's going to pay that capital price? And the answer is lots of people. Yeah, it's been a great success. Yeah. But yeah, I put that on the head, being a miserable Scotsman from the Caledonian Club, and saying, why pay that when you can get a 225 at half the price? Yeah, you could get two. Yeah, and if we're talking about capacity for firefighting, and I do know that, and this is no disrespect to the firefighters, a lot of firefighting procurement is ex-military, and there's a lot of what you and I know in the aviation industry is the big shiny complex. Spend a lot, big and shiny, can't go wrong. I think somebody somewhere needs to start stressing, whether it's the older 92s, your milestone worked on a retrofit for those, or the 225s. The need for firefighting equipment is now.
Yeah, it's a progressive thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. I'm in the process of writing a little story about firefighting, and in terms of acres burnt, tragic though they are, the current fires or just finishing fires are, in terms of acreage, they're nothing. But if you think about the impact, because it's an urban area or a suburban, as opposed to a remote part of the Northwestern Territories of Canada or Australia or something, it has that resonance and that impact on cost for insurance and this, that, and the other. I think we'll see the effects go for a very long time, and that may well drive a rethink on funding for fire support, not just in the Western states, but in the other part. I was shocked to learn that Dallas police a while back, and they proudly saying, "Look, we got this new Bambi bucket." I said, "Wow, for 407, yeah, we've got a hook and we've got a Bambi bucket." And I said, "But why?" He said, "Well, one, there is no firefighting capability within 3 hours of here, and it gives us another bite at the city budget for funding." There are elements there that come into play as well as that post current fires plays out, and not just there, but in Europe. I mean, after last summer, and thinking about where people used to be able to move assets from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere.
It's a great idea and it should work. But I remember you both at CHC and at Waypoint. We worked with incredibly great operators in LATAM and Spain. It was just more trouble than it was worth. It should work perfectly, shouldn't it? But of course, you've got, unlike our fixed wing colleagues, we're registered in the jurisdiction of operation, not of ownership. So you've got to change the reg to ship things over. Firefighting is unpredictable. So, you get a couple of weeks late here and so it's like playing chess with all black pieces in the dark while you're blindfolded.
While the table tilts, Clark, we could talk, I could talk for the rest of the day, but I know that you are a busy man and I can't take much more of your time. But I really appreciate you spending the time to share your wisdom and thoughts of the industry and where you think it might go.
Gideon, thank you very much.
Once again, time has beaten us, and I'd like to thank Clark for joining me. It's always good to talk to Clark. One of the best bits of the Helicopter Investor Conference are Clark's closing remarks. If you ever go to the event, stay for that bit. Join us again in 2 weeks' time, where we'll have another edition of the RoadHub International podcast. Until then, fly safe and keep the blue side up.